I am Katpalia. The basic point is we are planning and development for the sake of the people. And they are the ones who are forgotten. Now, you have brought out many things which have gone wrong or haywire. Now, the question is, how do we put them right? Now, that is where our attention should be and focus, bring about the focus of everybody to that. Now, for instance, unless we see it in perspective, that is in 2050, it is estimated that the population would get stabilized, and that comes to 1600 billion. Now, that is the base where we should start. Now, the present, in the last 10 years, we have seen that agriculture gives only 17 to 18% contribution to the GDP. The major portion comes from knowledge and skill, then which is almost 50%. The balance comes from mining and other industrial and other activities. Now the question is, unless livelihood has to increase and the people have to get much more than what they are getting, because we can't remove poverty just by saying so or through agriculture either. Agriculture should be only what is sufficiently required, not the demand, for the people, which will be 1600 billion. Let us reserve the land and the water, identify in various states throughout the country for that purpose. Do not export sugar or rice, which consume much more water, and that means you are indirectly exporting water, which is short in supply. So unless these policies are decided now, and then the various projects which are sanctioned or development fit into this sort of different mindset, we can never put things right. And it is only recently in the last 4 or 5 years that we have focused on education, knowledge, health, and skill development, which will take us another 10 years to really come up to the quality. You find in every town there are shortage of skilled people, there is a shortage of knowledgeable people who can contribute much more. And urbanization which is to take place, everybody comes and stays in the slums in bigger towns. Why can't we shift urbanization near the villages so that they don't have to shift? They can learn all the things, all the youth can be taught this knowledge and given this. So unless we change our mindset for planning for the future and in a different manner, so the water will be allocated accordingly, whether it is urban area or the other things. Agriculture, some water can be saved, and at least we can put more water into the river rather than the otherwise, which has been taken away already. Now the question is, the river management is required, very rightly, which nobody thinks of at the present moment. You're right, the water should be flowing throughout the year. How do we do it? You have to think of the forest, you have to think of the management. So these are the aspects which need to be considered. And you have very rightly said that the transfer of water from one basin to the other is not going to help. That is very correct. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of remarks, because the story, of course, that Himanshu has told us, I think it looks a little worse than some of the other stories we've been hearing in this series. You know, there's a present debate which is on about deciding what is an ecological flow in a river. Because I think you go back to the point that how can people do all these things, make these allocations, displace people, excavate the planet, get inundate forests and all that. It's going to go on. It's the same thing, and all of them are equally horrible. So I think we need to somewhere or the other talk about ecological flow. Now, in a country like India, I don't think it's a very difficult thing to talk about ecological flow. As a matter of fact, maybe one of these days, pretty soon, you might see an article by us where we tried to do this without going into too much history in current science. See, 80% of the water in India in all the rivers falls during the monsoon. right? And roughly speaking, if you go, for example, there's an exercise done on the Yamuna. If you look at all the soil that is transported from the mountains, it will be different for different rivers. Then it comes in very many sizes in terms of whatever microns and nanometers. And if you want to remove that soil down to the sea and keep the river, the main channel of the river from being desilted, at least half that monsoon flow will not even actually do it for you. Because it happens when you really have something like a flood or a situation like that, when the water level rises a lot. But for example, if most of the rivers are oversubscribed, as he pointed out, the Mahanadi is supposed to have a huge surplus. The Godavari, I was just looking at, also has a surplus. Maybe these surpluses are actually not real. But the Central Water Commission puts out this data. But 50% of the flow in any of the river actually is required for desilting. Forget about recharge of all the... Then there's something called an algal flow, which is a minimum flow. And for that you need a water speed of something like 0.4 meters per second, whereas in the monsoon it's going up to something like 2.25 meters per second. Otherwise, the water becomes stationary and you get algal growth, and this has happened in many rivers. As a matter of fact, one of your previous speakers from the Darling Basin was talking about that a little bit. So these are the two ends. Now, at the moment, I don't know about the other rivers in the Yamuna. The velocity is about, at this moment of time, is about 0.4 meters per second. And the height actually has really gone down to about 0.5 meters. And because of the friction. So somewhere, if we have these norms, no matter what you're going to build, I think it's impossibility now, if you're going to have any ecological norms, to use most of the rivers of India anymore, because they're already totally oversubscribed. So somewhere we have to get to some point. I mean, as he was saying, first we decide about rivers, not about the entire world, universe around us. But I just wanted to give you an example that one of the things, since river linking was one of the issues, see, the Indus Treaty between India and Pakistan was a treaty which seems to have been adhered to till now. But it did something, it was an extremely simple treaty, in the sense it said the northern three rivers, the Indus, the Jhelum and the Chenab, all the waters go to Pakistan. The southern three rivers, the Beas, the Ravi and the Satluj, go to India. Now, an interesting thing has happened in Lahore. When I was there, I noticed that the floodplain and the main channel of the Ravi, since it was not flowing 9 months a year, was being used as a solid waste dump. Not what's happening in the Yamuna, which is not happening yet. And somehow or the other, we managed to get some attention in the national television, and they decided that they would stop it. As a matter of fact, it depended on the anchor, not on the river, but the anchor on the 2 dimensions on the screen. But most of the water that comes to Lahore comes from the Chenab by canal. And now what has happened is that good water, which has passed through that whole Pakistan, Punjab, if you like, Doab, or almost everywhere those canals, the water has actually seeped from the seepage and taken salt down into the groundwater. So almost all the groundwater over there has got salinated, and you cannot do anything about that. So I'm just giving an example of what is really a bad non-ecological treaty which was made, where the quantums could be the same, but the rivers have to flow. So all I'm trying to say is that river linking, of course, is going to produce a much bigger disaster, because people forget that a river has been flowing for 50 million years. It is the best water that you can get if you don't disturb it, because it has cleaned out all the pollution, the salinity, all the soluble pollution. And then there are questions of, if you don't have that 50% flow, then you have ingress and mangroves and everything around the sea, and the life of millions of people is going to be affected. So somewhere in this, it would be a good idea, instead of, documenting disasters is always, I think, important, particularly pictorially. But I think somewhere we have to decide on this. And I think that 50% flow in the rainy season, which accounts for 80%, is absolutely necessary to cleanse the river, to soil transport, to recharge. And the rest of the time you have to actually, if you 9 months, which is 20%, if you don't have 50% of the flow, you get into even algal choking. Of course, you kill all the other fish biodiversity and often plant biodiversity. So why don't we do something which is simple? I mean, after these 9 sessions of living in dying rivers, we have to come up with something simple, right? And not keep on saying that every river is different, because there are some commonalities in the river. Sorry to take that much time, but I was just wanting to say something about river.